I have the pleasure to have in this podcast of ELIAMEP podcast series, Ambassador Philippe Étienne. He was Ambassador of France to the United States for many years, and he previously had numerous posts, including Permanent Representative of France to the European Union and ambassadorships to Romania and Germany and other key posts in Moscow, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Bonn. Ambassador Étienne, thank you so much for finding the time to have this discussion for the people that listen to ELIAMEP's podcast series. My first question to you has to do with United States. You know well United States. You have been there for many years. And do you feel now that democracy in the United States and its institutions are at risk?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored to be on your podcast, and thank you for your interest. I was ambassador of France to the United States between 2019 and 2023. So through the elections, the last election cycles in 2020, 2022, and in particular in 2020, in January 2021, we have seen the incidents which have accompanied the last presidential election, in particular on the Capitol Hill. I am still impressed by the strength of the American democracy and its institutions. This big country is going through a period of testing of its democracy. By the way, it is not the only one. We have also in Europe our own periods of difficulty. Democracy in general is confronted with not only threats outside, but also inside with a real challenge, in particular with information and the way information arrives to its citizens. And this is one of the reasons why in the United States the situation is so polarized. But I always insist on the fact that the large majority of the American citizens is absolutely not radical. On the contrary, still there is this danger stemming from the polarization of the societies, the polarization inside the parties, the evolution of such a large party like the Republican Party, for instance, but also, I would say, this atmosphere of political violence, as we have noticed with the last attempts of assassination against the candidate Trump. There is this situation, but as I said already, the United States has very strong institutions and a large part of its population, a large part of its citizens, which doesn't want more violence. So the next presidential elections will happen in this context. The risk is that the result will be again very close, like it was in 2020 and even in 2016, that the result being very close and being, as a matter of fact, created only in a couple of states, maybe in seven states among the 50 states which compose the United States. There would be, again, like in 2020 by Donald Trump, there would be people who refuse to recognize the result. This is, of course, a real risk. So let's hope as Europeans that our American partner will whatever the result will be, go peacefully or as peacefully as possible through these elections. Of course, what's happening in the United States is very important for the whole world because it is the United States, and in particular, it's really important for us as European democracies, as allies of the United States.
So how these elections in the US are definitely going to be very difficult, but how do you think the result will affect Europe and France and the war in Ukraine, Middle East? We have a lot of crises around us. How do you think the result will affect that? I mean, if Kamala Harris is president or if Donald Trump is president?
Yes, considering the state of the world and the crisis which add one to the other without any of them being solved, the importance of the United States on the world stage makes these elections and their result still more important for the world, as it would have been without all this crisis, of course, and especially for us Europeans. So first, for us in Europe, and in particular for the European Union. I will say that first, of course, the result matters because the two candidates have not the same attitudes towards the relations with the allies of the United States, and also have not at all the same attitude towards the international system as it is now, and as it is really important also for us in Europe, in spite of its own crisis, its own needs for a deep transformation. So the result will have consequences. I just give one example. In terms of trade and economy, Donald Trump has announced a big surge in tariffs, not only towards China, but also a somewhat lesser, but still very, very big increase in tariffs towards all countries, including the allies of the United States, like he has done when he was president between 2017 and 21 on steel and aluminum. I remember I was there in Washington. So, this will create issues, of course, and there will be maybe, again, transatlantic disputes on trade and economy, which will test the transatlantic relation, that would test the transatlantic relation and our economic relations and our economies as such. This being said, and after having recognized and documented the real differences for the Europeans between the two scenarios of American elections, I would add something which seems to go in the other direction, but which is complementary, because my previous remark was on the short term, I mean 2 to 4 next 4 years. But look, on a longer perspective, whatever the result of the American election will be, the result of what the American people want, I think the Europeans have to decide for themselves, because like the US, whoever is the president of the United States decides for its own people. The Europeans have also to make their choices for the Europeans. I mean, the European leaders and European countries have to make their own decisions for the Europeans. And whatever the result is, I think there is a clear direction which has been, for instance, the last document which shows clearly the direction is a report presented by Mario Draghi. And so we know what we have to do, basically. I don't say we all agree in Europe. There is a strong discussion on how we finance all these challenges: technological transition, climate and energy transition, defense, a real defense effort, which we must make, and we must make together. But still, we have this direction. And this direction is the direction of European sovereignty, which means that we must keep the ways to decide on our own future. It doesn't mean at all that we should diverge from the United States. I think that it is exactly the contrary. From my experience in the United States, I think that the American partners and friends will be more keen to keep their alliance, their involvement in the security of Europe in the long term, if they see that the Europeans themselves make real efforts. And otherwise, there is always the idea around in the United States, well, it's more the matter of the Europeans to defend Europe, and we are more focused on our own interests, which are now mostly in the Pacific and Indo-Pacific region. And here comes Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine and the war in Ukraine is a huge stake in the coming months. And we have one of the candidates, Donald Trump in the US, who says this war, which would not even have happened if I had been president at the time, I will stop it very quickly because I can do it. So what does it mean? We would see if he's elected. But there is a big stake, and there is in what he says. I think he said it in the debate with Kamala Harris, the impression that the Europeans are, as I said before, the ones who are the most interested and should do more to support Ukraine, for instance. I think we do already a lot, but we have to really consider what's happening in Ukraine as a real recall or wake-up call on what we have to do in Europe in general, and which is what I explained before.
I want us to go here to Europe and to France. Are you worried about what is happening in France, not only with the rise of the far right, but also the great difficulty of forming a government? Are you worried about the future? And I want to talk also not only about France, but also about Germany, because there we see also the rise of the far right. So are you worried about what is happening to our democracy in Europe?
Well, I said it in my first answer. We have some challenges in our democracies, like the US in its democracy, with the same kind of threats, the same kind of difficulties or maybe challenges, or even opportunities to adapt our democracy to these times where the information is given in quite another way, is distributed. And I say opportunities because it's also the opportunity to think of how we can have a more vibrant democracies, and maybe on top of the basis of our democracies, which is the election of our leaders and the power of our parliaments, we have to imagine other ways of convincing our citizens that they are really part of the decisions. For instance, in France, but not only in France, we have recently started to have citizens assemblies to discuss important legislations before bringing draft legislations to the parliament. So we have this general challenge, which is common, I think, for all of us in Europe and among the democracies. And we have a lot to learn one from the other. The rise of the populist parties and the Eurosceptic parties is also the result of the fact that we have, for instance, in the field of migration and asylum policies, but also in the field of economy, in defense. I think that the citizens have not the impression that the governments, the previous governments, have given sufficient answers to these big issues. And here there is the basic question is, are we more efficient as the European Union together, or as those parties very often say, should we take back our competences at the national level? I remark that the same Eurosceptic parties have moved, by the way, from their initial demands, which was frankly to completely dismantle the European Union through national exits like Brexit, because also Brexit has proved how it was difficult for the United Kingdom. But still, yes, we have this surge also during the last European Parliament elections of those parties in many countries in Europe. In France, in particular, and in France, we have a political system which has no tradition to form coalitions when such situations happen in our parliaments, where it becomes difficult to find a majority in the parliament, which is the situation of France since the last parliamentary elections, which followed the European Parliament elections. This is the reason, or at least one of the main reasons why it has been taking so long to find a new prime minister and to form a new government. But I don't think that among the mainstream parties in France there is a strong disagreement on the necessity to strengthen the European Union, and there is here a lot of common views on, maybe not in the field of economy and fiscal policies, in the field of the necessity to reinforce Europe, but for reinforcing Europe in the fields of defense and technology, for instance.
In the last months, we see also a crack in the Franco-German axis, and if it collapses, if we don't see that strong cooperation between France and Germany, that will be dangerous. Do you think? How dangerous will that be for the European Union, for Europe?
I have been even twice posted in Germany, in Bonn, as a young diplomat, and more recently as ambassador to Germany in Berlin. I have been following the French-German relations for decades, and I will observe first that through the history of those relations after World War II, and after the reconciliation, which followed World War II, and which was the main foundation of the European integration process, every 2-3 years, maybe even every year, you see comments which say that the French-German relation is in crisis. 40 years ago, recently I read documents from that time, and which said it is not going any more well. So let's take some distance also from the what's happening right now. And also, I appreciate that the other countries in the European Union say, look, France and Germany should be more should agree more, because otherwise they block their disagreements could block us all. But if France and Germany agree, and sometimes they agree very much and they make together fundamental proposals, the other countries tend to say, oh, they ignore that we have also to be part of the decisions. So it is this tension between France and Germany being too close or too far apart. I recognize, as you said in your question, that now this relation is put to the same tests as everything, especially to the test of the invasion of Ukraine, of the competition between the United States and China, which the first one led to the German Chancellor to speak about Zeitenwende, a new era. We see changes which are of a magnitude that we probably never had before. And like everything else, the French-German relation has to adapt to this. We had never, with Germany, France and Germany had never the same interests, the same history, the same geography, and the value of the French-German cooperation and understanding is exactly in the fact that at the beginning we start from very different positions. If we were always in agreement at the beginning, our agreement would have no value in Europe. We would represent the same position from the beginning, but it is absolutely not the case. France being France and Germany being Germany, with all what this means, we have to work a lot to get to common positions. And when the world moves around us, like it has been doing in the last years, we have still to work more and to make more efforts. And it takes, unfortunately, sometimes more time. But my observation is that we always get finally to a common understanding and very often to common proposals. It happened, for instance, at the end of the COVID crisis, where we made a revolutionary move, especially Germany. The Chancellor, who was then Minister of Finance, spoke about a Hamiltonian moment for the Europeans. And when we decided to create new instruments for the EU to help the European countries to get out of the economic crisis, which was a result of the pandemics. And we have done this for many other issues. So yes, let's recognize that the task it's much more difficult, especially after what happened around us, which endangers our economies, our security. We see the debates in Germany, for instance, about the orientation of the country. We see the need to have an industrial policy for Europe, which was maybe not. It has always been the priority of France, but it was maybe less a priority in other parts of Europe, including Germany, because free trade at this time, or exports, was more the base for an economy where the industry, Germany was always powerful, and Germany was successfully keeping in the industry. Now we see that the industrial policy is really essential in all our countries. And I see for the future hope for a strong European Union policy and French-German positions, because finally, in spite of all our differences, we have all these very big challenges, common challenges for us Europeans, from what's happening around us in the world.
Ambassador Étienne, thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.